I know it kind of sounds like a heavy metal band from the 80s or a country band. Hey, maybe it is a country band. We didn't research that. But what we're talking about is one of the more important events of early American history, and it's probably something you don't know very much about. In fact, it was the very first serious challenge to federal authority in the brand new United States of America. That's right, we're talking about the Whiskey Rebellion. Here's everything you need to know and some things you don't about the Whiskey Rebellion. The United States, 1791, brand new government. The Constitution isn't even 2 years old. George Washington is in his first term as president, and his Federalist buddy, Alexander Hamilton, is the first Secretary of the Treasury. The new federal government is flat broke. We're worse than broke. They're $25 million in the red. Now, in case you aren't hip on the setup, they've just fought a protracted battle of independence against the British, the most powerful military force in the world. And understandably, they had to borrow a little money to get her done. Now, Hamilton is looking at the books, and there's a lot of notes coming due, and the money just isn't there. In fact, Hamilton has just assumed the remaining war debt from the individual states, creating the first U.S. central bank to do it. On top of that, the U.S. is fighting a war against the Western Lakes Confederation of Indians, and that's pricey and it's not going well. He needs some money. The only way the federal government was authorized to collect revenue up to this point was by placing duties on imports. Hamilton tells Washington there's no way they could raise duties any farther, but something has to be done. What was born was the nation's first excise tax. That's a tax on a domestically produced product. It was a fee on distilled spirits, the so-called whiskey tax. Now, the problem with any tax, especially back then, is that somebody's got to go out and collect it, and that was not going to be easy in the western states. You see, the Western farmers did not like the whiskey tax. In fact, they hated it a lot. They felt it unfairly targeted small grain producers in the West. They were a long way from the population centers in the East, and they had to convert a lot more of their grain to alcohol to make it profitable to transport. They also ended up paying a higher percentage of tax on their product than the big distilleries. Sound familiar? And they didn't think that was fair. Among their allies were the Revolutionary War veterans who thought it sounded suspiciously like taxation without local representation, which they just fought the British over. And of course, the Jeffersonian Republicans like Old Tom himself and James Madison, who opposed Hamilton's federal power grab. So we have Federalists like Washington and Hamilton allied with Eastern banking interests and people who don't think other people should be drinking alcohol at all, frankly. Versus the Western farmers who had fought the Revolution, fought the Indians, and were ready to fight again. These were some rough, rugged dudes, pounding out an existence on the frontier of civilization, not pushovers. So Hamilton starts sending out tax collectors, and it's all going pretty well until he runs into certain parts of western Pennsylvania where they're met by increasingly large groups of armed protesters. A few of these tax collectors get tarred and feathered and sent back empty-handed. It all comes to a head in 1794 at the Battle of Bower Hill, south of Pittsburgh. An anti-tax militia headed by Major James McFarland surrounds a house where a federal tax marshal and a U.S. Army general are holed up. Federal reinforcements are sent, and McFarland ends up being shot and killed. On August 1st, 7,000 angry protesters gather using McFarland's death as a rallying cry and start to march on the city of Pittsburgh. Moderates in the movement are able to appeal for calm, and the march goes off with only scattered violence. 2 weeks later, the meeting at Whiskey Point is held. 226 rebels hold a congress and narrowly agree to comply with the federal decree as well as appointing delegates to meet with Washington's negotiators. The delegates and the tax negotiators come to an agreement, but the farmers themselves weren't buying it and still wouldn't pay the tax. So, Justice James Wilson delivers a ruling stating that Western Pennsylvania is an open rebellion, triggering the use of federal power under the Militia Act of 1792. Pro-Federalist militias are called up in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia. Now, not a lot of people are lining up for the chance to shoot their neighbor, so a draft has to be instituted to fill out the ranks. They eventually raise a huge federalized militia army of 13,000 men under the command of Governor Henry Lee of Virginia and head west. George Washington himself comes to the front in October 1794 and becomes the first and last sitting president to directly command a combat unit. The federal forces sweep across the countryside and utterly crush the remaining resistance. Dozens are arrested and tried, but only a handful are executed as Washington tries to mend ties with the West. What's really crazy is that after all this hubbub, the whiskey tax is abolished in 1801 when Thomas Jefferson and his Jeffersonian Republicans take power. It also led to the Insurrection Act of 1807, limiting presidential powers of law enforcement. You should definitely look that up, as well as the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878 and how both of those laws were modified by the Defense Authorization Act of 2007. It might be one of the most important conversations you should be having, but probably aren't. I'm just saying. So there you have it. It was triggered by the first excise tax in U.S. history. It was the first open rebellion against the new U.S. government. It was a crucial test of Alexander Hamilton's economic policy. It was the first and last time a U.S. president directly commanded troops while in office, and it led to a debate about presidential and federal powers of law enforcement that is still going on today. And that's everything you need to know, and some things you don't, about the Whiskey Rebellion. Thanks for watching. Please check out the links in the description below. If you enjoyed this presentation, please like it and share it with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe for more exciting content from TLSPUD Presents. Thanks again.